But I imagine what we'll do is we'll walk it through all the way, just to confirm what we're doing today.
Yeah, that's right.
That talk.
Yeah, let's
sets the tone almost.
Yeah.
So the hearse limousine are about to arrive. I've told them to wait at the top, and then I'll give them a call once they're outside, and then we can invite at the top. Chris, my dad, will then lead the hearse limousine down, and we'll do the footage outside of them arriving. And I said what we'll do, we'll just do the whole walkthrough of the coffin from the hearse, and Alan explaining what's going on at each stage based on the script plan. I'll say as well, this is not there is nobody in the coffin. I want to state that on camera as well, just so people.
It's important to state early on.
That gives people the real indication. This is to show them exactly how it had happened, but it's not a real funeral. It's it is just for demonstration purposes.
Also, we're going to show people today what happens behind the curtain, and Alan's going to lead us to the conversation. And also, why is this important to Alan? When did he start showing people around crematoriums? Why did he think that was important all those years ago? Why does he think it's important now? If you're happy, we'll do that now before they get here, if that's okay?
Yeah, that's absolutely fine. Yeah.
Great stuff. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Death, a Changing Industry. Today, with the great pleasure to be welcomed by the team at Mercia Forest Crematorium. And today we are with Alan José, who will be showing us around the crematorium, and actually finally removing some of the myths around cremation. And for the first time, we'll be going behind the curtains at a crematorium to show people the respect and dignity that takes place and all the procedures that takes place as well. As I feel, there are a lot of myths around cremation in the UK, and I don't think that's very helpful for people who are bereaved or the public who are seeing and hearing about things that might be going on. So Alan, thank you for having us here at Mercia Forests. And am I right in understanding as well that you've been doing open days at crematoriums for some time now, is that correct?
It certainly is, John. In fact, I had the first open day at a crematorium in the UK, as far as I understand it, at Parndon Wood Crematorium in Harlow in 1977.
And why is that important to you? So you saw that need back there in 1977, and you're here today to do the first visual and audio recording of an open day. Why is that important to you, Alan?
I think it's very important because I think there are a lot of myths around not only death and talking about death, but really it's the fear of the unknown. I think people are very able to see, for example, at a graveside service for a burial, they can see the fact the coffin is lowered into the ground, and that's all very visible. But what happens at a crematorium is subject to quite a lot of myth and misunderstanding, perhaps, and almost fear. I think fear might be a bit of a strong word, but certainly it makes people feel a bit uncomfortable. What happens when that curtain has closed and the coffin has disappeared from sight? So it's important to me to try and reassure people that the care and the dignity of the deceased, which is core to everything that we do at the crematorium, goes beyond people's view. And I think that's why it's important to me.
And Mercia Forest, Alan, is also part of the Westerleigh Group. Could you talk to us about what the Westerleigh Group do? And before you do as well, Westerleigh, for me personally, have always been very supportive, as have you, being a sponsor of the podcasts, which I've always been very grateful for, and also the campaign to add content on death, dying and bereavement in the education system. Westerleigh and yourself have always been a huge advocate, so a huge thank you as well. But
that's a great pleasure, John.
If you could explain about the sort of background of Westerleigh Group as well, please.
Certainly can, yes. Well, the Westerleigh Group is now 32 years old. The first crematorium at Westerleigh was opened in 1992. And since that time, the group has grown, in fact, now to being one of the largest private groups of crematoria operators in the country. We have 40 crematoria across England, Wales and Scotland. And they range from, as I say, Scotland right down to Cornwall and all places in between. So we are a large company. In fact, we served more bereaved families than any other individual group of operators. But our core mission is to absolutely put the bereaved at the centre of all we do, and the dignity of the deceased at the centre of all we do too. Westerleigh are very proud to be able to work in the communities that we serve, and really care about what we do.
Yeah, well, thank you again for showing us around today. I am very excited about doing this, but I'm also very aware that this is sensitive conversations that we're having today. We're showing people sensitive information, but it's important information. And actually, that's what we've seen throughout, that what is perceived as difficult is actually very important. So thank you. I'm really looking forward to this afternoon. So the hearse has now arrived with the coffin on the hearse, and as we said, there is nobody in that coffin, just for those watching or listening. The limousine has arrived as well, which the family will be travelling behind the hearse if they've opted for that. So can you talk to us about what happens next then, please?
Yep, certainly, John. Well, next the funeral director and the bearers will gather behind the hearse in readiness for actually shouldering the coffin into the chapel. Shouldering is common practice really throughout the country. It's perhaps a British thing rather than trolleys, because it seems to be very dignified. Funerals are very much about ceremony and about being part of the grieving process, obviously. And so it's important that those things are done well.
So before the conductor calls in the bearers, on the day of a funeral service, where would the family be located at this stage now?
The family would be gathering to the side of the limousine and by the porte cochere here, ready to follow the coffin into the chapel. The first thing that actually our chapel attendant will do is to check the name on the coffin to make sure that it's the name that we expect it to be.
Yep.
Because obviously identity throughout the whole cremation process, as we will see later on, is critical.
So what we're going to do now then, Graham, who's a crematorium attendant, will go and check the identification of the coffin, and Chris, our driver, will assist Graham with that procedure. So if we hand over now to the conductor, to Chris, and he will do the next steps.
So the bearers are now taking the coffin from the hearse. 4 bearers and a gentleman at the head, just to assist and make sure it's a smooth lift onto the shoulders.
So Alan, the coffin is now in position. The crematorium attendant, who is Graham today, has checked the identification before the coffin has come through. The conductor and the bearers have now gone outside, and if there was a service taking place, they would come through at the end of the service to look after the family. So can we talk about now what happens during a funeral service, please?
We certainly can. So the service will be normally led by a celebrant or clergyman or lady who will actually lead the service. Services today are much more likely to be a celebration of life led by a celebrant rather than a clergyman or woman. Very much part of the service these days is the family's involvement, which is much more than it ever used to be in selecting music. And indeed, music plays a huge part. We've got screens in the chapel, as you've no doubt seen. So we've got a whole range of options. They can be as simple and straightforward as a family might like, or they can almost be as elaborate as anybody might like to.
You and I have spoken before about an experience you had where we talk about personalisation
Yes.
and changing space.
Yeah.
Where you actually allowed a family to have a horse in the chapel, which is an extreme example, but it highlights those core values which you stand by. They are true, because a lot of places wouldn't allow that to happen.
A nephew asked me if it would be possible for the pony to lead the cortege down the main drive to the crematorium doors. And I said to him, look, if you want to, the pony can lead the coffin through the chapel if you like. And he said, really? And I said, yeah, absolutely. And so that's what happened. And the family were really appreciative of that, because that pony was absolutely integral to the life of that lady. And it was such a big part of her and the way she was viewed within the village. So, yeah, that was an unusual example. Not the first time we've had ponies in the chapel, though, because at Christmas services a couple of times we've had ponies, taking part in the Christmas story. So, look, what we want to do is to make these things achievable for families. If we can do it, we will do it. We don't want to say no unless there's a really, really valid reason for not allowing something.
So, Alan, we'll make our way over to the coffin now. Do you think it's important having the coffin present for a funeral service? And I asked that question based on the changes we're seeing now in the UK around unattended direct cremation, or as I call them, no contact cremation. Do you think it's important having the coffin here? And again, for those watching or listening, just to confirm, there is nobody in this coffin today. This has been used to demonstrate what happens at a funeral service.
As you know, John, I've been working in this profession for a very long time. And over that time, the one thing I've absolutely understood is the need for people to grieve. And I think it's very tempting to think that it's easy and perhaps more convenient not to have a service in a traditional sense. I think there's a real disconnect then between families who are grieving, and it's a natural human thing to grieve. If we've lost someone we love, we're going to grieve. And I think it's really an important part of the grieving process to be able to have a ceremony of some sort, however simple or elaborate, to actually have a final goodbye. And I know it's a much used word these days, the word closure, but actually it's the realisation in real life that we're not going to see that person anymore. And however hard that is, I think it's an important part of people being able to let go and to move on to the next stage of their lives.
In a moment, we're going to carry out the committal, where the inner and outer set of curtains will close and a piece of music will play. Prior to that, could you explain to us at the end of the service what happens with the family and the conductor of the funeral, and where the conductor will take the family, please?
Committal is a very important part of the service, and it's often, when the curtains close, a very painful part of the service, which is why families these days have the option of the curtains remaining open, for example. Some people just find that sort of moment just a little bit too difficult to cope with. And after the committal, whoever's conducting the service will actually then say the final words of commendation or reflection, and very often as well there's an ending piece of music which is a favourite of the deceased. What will happen then is that the funeral director, the conductor, will come down to the front of the chapel and lead them through the chapel exit doors into the flower terrace, where any floral tributes that may be accompanying the coffin will be displayed for the family.
So the family, once they're outside, will have some time out there prior to going to their post-funeral reception, or wake as it's known, but there's no rush to leave the venue.
No, there isn't. I mean, generally speaking, we have an hour between our services, which leaves plenty of time for a meaningful service in the chapel, and time for the family to comfortably leave and have a chat outside, because very often, of course, funerals, people haven't seen each other for a long time, and so they will naturally have a discussion outside, and it's traditional too, of course, to thank whoever's conducted the service.
Thank you, Alan. So what we'll do now, if we take a step back, and during that time, the committal music will begin to play.
Yep.
So the committal has now taken place, and now, for the first time, we're going to go behind the curtain to show people a lot of these myths aren't correct, and actually give real clear, informative information to people. And I believe, as you do, that's going to help people move forward with the right information. So if you're comfortable, Alan, we'll go behind the curtain now.
There's nothing to fear behind the curtain, but of course it is the fear of the unknown very often that people are concerned about. And we're going to demonstrate today, firstly, by actually showing the curtains closing from the other side, if you like, of the catafalque. So we're going to follow that through, and then we'll be in a room called a receiving chamber, which is the room between the chapel and the crematory, which we will then go into later on. But that's what we're going to do next.
So Alan, we're now in the next stage of the crematorium with the procedures. Could you please explain what this room is used for?
Yeah, so this is where we call the committal room or receiving chamber, which is where we bring the coffin from the catafalque in the chapel into the room that divides the chapel and the crematory, which we will be going into shortly. It's a room which acts as a sound barrier between the chapel and the crematory. There's nothing I can promise anybody that they're going to see or hear that is going to be shocking to them, but we'll explain the process as we go along. So the chapel attendant is now checking the coffin plate once more to make sure, again, because this is a continual process of checking to make sure the identity is clearly established. Yeah.
So Alan, we've now moved into the next phase, and a very important phase of the crematorium. Are you comfortable now to explain what happens in this space? And also we'll start to unpick some of the myths that we hear in the UK around cremation as well.
So we're in the crematory now, which is the part which of course is not seen by the public, generally speaking. And again, we come to the really important part of identification always. And we see next to us here the cremator, which is the piece of equipment where the actual body is cremated. That's actually a large piece of equipment, as we can see. It's made up of 3 chambers. The main chamber obviously is where the coffin's charged into. One of the big myths around cremation is people say, well, how many coffins do you put into the cremator at any one time? We can see by the door and the size of the cremator at the door that there is only room for 1 coffin in the cremator. So only 1 coffin is ever cremated at any one time in the cremator.
So Alan, you made it very clear that 1 coffin goes into the cremator at one stage. One of the myths we hear are about handles. Do they come off the coffin? Do they stay on the coffin? And also, how is the coffin placed? You mentioned the word charged into the cremator.
Yeah.
What is that and how does it work?
The coffin is charged, John, into the cremator exactly as we receive it. But everything goes straight into the cremator. Nothing is taken off before the coffin is charged. The charging of the coffin obviously is important, and there's a lot of health and safety issues around. We're talking about a lot of heat and high temperatures in that cremator. And so all our cremator operators are given protective equipment. Before the coffin is actually charged, there's a panel, and on that panel there's an opportunity which we put the name of the deceased in, the cremation number, and that records on our electronic systems. But that is an additional process which adds to the formality of having a card that follows that system all the way through. And then the cremator goes on to automatic mode, completely controlled by the computer for the first hour. Lots of things come into it, but it senses the oxygen levels to make sure that the cremation is as efficient as it can be.
We have mentioned a few times today, the coffin we're using today is a dummy coffin. There is nobody in this coffin, and the flowers are still on the coffin. They would be removed for cremation, and they would usually go to where the family would go to outside. Just to clarify that point for those people watching or listening. Yes. Could you now discuss and explain the environmental impacts, please, and what your crematorium does to help with the environment with cremation?
Mercia Forest here is one of the most environmentally friendly crematoria, certainly in the UK, but also in Europe. Clean to air is effectively what we're looking to do. And we have a lot of systems in place for that. We have mercury and particulate abatement, and that's activated by the introduction of activated carbon into the system. We don't emit all of the gases directly into the atmosphere. They have to go through a bag filter. And so the gases, when they leave the cremator, exit around between 800 and 1,000 degrees centigrade. They then pass through a boiler, which reduces the temperature of those gases down to around 200 degrees, which makes it safe for those gases to pass through a bag filter. And once a day, that's rattled down and put into a drum of spent carbon, which is then sent off regularly for recycling. So that's the whole process. So then the gases do then go through into the chimney and exit, I won't say it's cleaner than atmosphere, but it's very clean. So, gone are the days of black smoke and full of obnoxious substances.
What temperature will the cremator get to, and how long will it take to cremate a person?
Well, the average cremator operates at around about between 800 and 1,000 degrees, let's say around about 1,000 degrees. But of course, before we can charge the coffin into the cremator, the cremator has to cool down to make it safe to charge. As I say, there are health and safety issues around charging, and there's equipment, helmets, visors, gauntlets in particular, to make sure it's as safe as it can be. But the cremator cools down generally to around about 750 degrees between cremation, so it's safe to charge. So that's the sort of thing. And the average time is about an hour and a half or 90 minutes. Some do obviously take a little bit less than that. Some do take longer, but the average is definitely around about an hour and a half.
Just going back then to the starting point of when the conductor and the hearse and the coffin arrived at the crematorium, can we now just run through, please, at what points, as an overview, at what points is identification carried out, please?
The first point is that when the coffin arrives, that's checked by the chapel attendant to make sure that matches the details that we have. The second identity check is taken when the coffin is moved from the catafalque into the receiving chamber, and then finally, before the coffin is actually charged into the cremator. At the time, when the details of the deceased are actually entered into the system. The card is physically actually put on the front of the cremator at each stage of the operation. After the end of the cremation, then that card moves again with the ashes.
So we're now at the phase and stage of the ashes form. I'd like to go through now how we get to that stage and what happens next, but also along recycling, what happens with that. As I know, Westerleigh have been very generous in the past, especially to Child Bereavement UK and other charities around the UK. How does that work as well, Alan?
The end of the cremation process, the ashes are raked into a receptacle at the end of the hearth. They're then cooled for around about 45 minutes, something like that, before they're actually moved into an ash pan, as we would call it. Now, what happens then at that stage is that a magnet is passed through the ash pan to collect all the nails, pins, screws, hip joints, knee joints, all these sorts of things, which are then put into a specialised bin, which go off for recycling. Now, taking a step back, families are always asked about metal recycling. In fact, it's on the statutory form now about metal recycling. Families are asked about that. And since in the 20 years that metal has been recycled within our sector, not just at Westerleigh, but within the cremation sector, well over £15 million has been raised for charity. So we can support environmental projects, for example, as well as other things locally. So we're very much engaged with charities. In fact, we've got 4 principal charities this year, including Child Bereavement UK. The ashes then, when the metals have been removed, go through another process which is called the cremation process, whereas the bones are put into a machine that actually reduce the bone residue into the fine ash, which we call the ashes, or sometimes referred to as cremated remains. And again, the label, the identity follows everything through every stage. And then when the ashes are removed either by the family or by the funeral director on their behalf, those ashes are signed for in an ashes register, and by the funeral director or the family who will come to collect them. The whole process of the ashes is recorded from the start to the finish as to what happened. In fact, an interesting fact that around about 80% of ashes are removed from crematoria across the country.
Alan, thank you so much for showing us all the stages and phases of what happens at a crematorium. I think it's so useful for the public and professionals to see what happens, the care that's shown, the facilities that you have here, and the procedures from a legal point as well. And I hope that also builds reassurance out in the public about that care within your facilities. So what we have now is the ashes now in this container. This box is empty again, but just to show those people the container in which families or funeral directors will have the ashes back. Can we talk through about the legalities, about who is allowed to collect ashes and what goes back to a family along with the ashes, please?
Firstly, about who can collect ashes. And it is very much misunderstood. But the legal definition of the person who is the only person who is allowed to make decisions around the ashes is the applicant for the cremation. So the applicant for the cremation, regardless of whether they're the next of kin, which they normally are and should normally be, but if somebody is an executor but not the applicant for the cremation, then the applicant for the cremation is the only person who can make a decision about ashes, and the only person who can dictate where and what should happen to them. So it's very common for the applicant for the cremation to say, I agree for the funeral director, for example, to collect the cremated remains or ashes on my behalf, in which case the crematorium is authorised to release the ashes to the funeral director. But if it's release the ashes to the applicant, it is only the applicant who can come and collect them, or in the absence of the applicant or them wishing to nominate somebody else, they have to put in writing to the crematorium that they can no longer collect them and they will nominate somebody else to collect them. In either case, if an applicant or a nominated person is coming to the crematorium to collect ashes, they have to produce identity. and that can be in the form of a passport or driving licence, preferably. Believe it or not, it's one of the most contentious areas around, what can be understood. People think, oh, well, I'm the executor, I should be able to say, but if they're not the applicant, that can't be done. So let's just be really clear about that. Secondly, when it comes to decisions around ashes, there's a number of options which people can choose. One is to have the ashes scattered at the crematorium. Another is to obviously have them collected by the funeral director or collect them themselves. Something which some people do need to reflect on sometimes is, please hold them at the crematorium while we think about what's going to happen. But if that happens, when they have made a decision, the family, they do have to notify the crematorium in writing of what that change of instruction is going to be. So those are really what the options are. All Westerleigh crematoria, ashes are released to funeral directors or to families in a suitable container. In our cases, in biodegradable boxes and in biodegradable bags, which are specially made so that they literally are biodegradable. It's many years ago now, in fact, probably about 8 years ago, that Westerleigh as a group made the decision to go plastic free. And we've stuck to that ever since, as far as we possibly can. So we're really proud of that as well, because our environmental credentials have always been important.
And regarding the container as well, you do have alternative options, don't you?
We do. I mean, that's the basic, biodegradable box that, comes as standard. But there are a number of options available, from wicker to metal urns to all sorts of different shapes and sizes, to, scatter tubes and so on that can be decorated with woodland scenes, all sorts of things. So there's a huge number of options, like everything else available to families today. But the standard, part of the cremation fee and part of that service is to have them properly presented, properly identified. We've already talked about the two label system that we've followed the process all the way through, the identify, and that those two labels are used at the very last time. One to identify the ashes in the bag, the second one to identify the box. The third piece of paperwork that accompanies ashes is a certificate of cremation, which actually proves that the cremation took place at, in this case, Mercia Forest Crematorium, and the details of the deceased, the date the cremation took place, and so on and so forth. And the cremation number, critically, which we talked about all the way through, is actually on that certificate. We also offer some guidance to families about what they can do with ashes. You can't, for example, just take them along to your local football club and scatter them on their turf, which a lot of people would like to do. You do need to seek the landowner's permission to actually scatter ashes, and that's an important part of what we do. So we do give advice on what can happen. So, so families, can seek advice from us, they can seek advice from their funeral director, but in all cases, we try and make sure families are best prepared as they can be to deal with ashes appropriately.
Yeah, thank you so much, Alan. And to build on the alternative caskets and containers, you also have alternative options, such as ashes going into space, ashes in fireworks, ashes into jewellery, and also I know Westerleigh also offer the service of ashes into vinyl records. I've even seen it as well, where some family members have placed loved ones' ashes into tattoos. So there's a wide range. And what I would say to people when I'm arranging a funeral or after the service is think about something that means something to you. Is there a location that's important to you? And again, as you stated, it's really important to obtain permission from the landowner if you wish to inter ashes or to scatter ashes at a location. And my advice always would be is to go through your funeral director for that advice. Moving forward, Alan, to you personally now. I've known you for a few years now, and you are so passionate about service, the standards, and supporting bereaved people. What drives you? What pushes you forward to offer that level of service and to really truly help people? Because this is very much more than just a job to you.
It's something which I have found tremendously rewarding throughout my long career, and working with lots and lots of funeral directors, lots of other professionals within the cremation and burial sector, and in trying to drive standards. And in fact, that's something that's driven me, I don't know, ever since I first entered things. It's been important to me that we do things right. We treat people with care and compassion and with empathy. And I think that's utterly important at the core of everything, not only that I do, but certainly that I've always done, and certainly that is at the core of what Westerleigh do.
Getting to know you so well, I know you're very modest, but you are a leading voice in advising governments and other professionals around crematorium and cremation. So you are the perfect person to speak to today about this. So thank you for showing us and talking to us about this work, this important work. So finally, I'm also aware that you've suffered close loss. You have gone through grief. You're still going through that as well. Are you comfortable to talk about what your experiences are of grief and bereavement, and actually how doing these important acts here, how they've helped you move forward?
I feel that, particularly when my wife died, very suddenly and completely unexpectedly, that I found myself really, probably for the first time in my life, truly understanding the depth of real close bereavement, I suppose. Certainly I'd lost my parents, grandparents before that, aunts and uncles and so on, but it almost seemed to be within the expected way life works. You're I think you're hardwired to think, well, grandparents are going to die at some point, they've had a life, and parents too. But when it's somebody close to you who dies, fairly young, then obviously that really hit home to me. And that has been a difficult journey, actually, for the last 5 years or so, nearly. But also, what it's strangely given me is actually renewed the passion I have to make sure we try and help people as much as we possibly can on these most difficult of occasions. And I know that the help of, first of all, my family, my colleagues, my friends and community where I live have all helped, me go through that grieving process. And I think that's why I think it's so important that we not only talk about this amongst the funeral profession, the cremation sector, the whole gambit of people who are involved in looking after bereaved people is so important. Yeah. And all of those collectively help people like me, and have helped me and continue to help me, be positive about life.
I think it highlights the importance of that community and connection, which we keep coming back to on this podcast. And I think you are a leading light in what that is and what that stands for. And I think the final thing to say to you is that I think your late wife would be very proud of the work that you do, the service you provide the bereaved, and the true care and compassion you show everybody, the deceased and bereaved people, and your colleagues and everybody that knows you, Alan. So thank you so much for your time today in showing us around the way you have, and your colleagues as well, who have been so supportive of this conversation to provide transparency to the public. So thank you so much, Alan.
You're very welcome, John. It's been a pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alan. Very moved, actually.
Good. Very moved. Yeah, actually, I'll share with someone today. It's almost quite difficult. It would have been my wife's birthday today.
Oh, really?
So,
oh, well.
But it's quite
fitting, isn't it?
Yeah, it's fitting in a way.